You're listening to Agency Alchemy, a podcast from Advertising Week. Join us as we sit down with top agency executives to uncover the secrets behind their success and explore how they're navigating the ever-evolving advertising landscape. From discussions around innovative strategies and emerging trends to effective leadership conversations, each episode offers invaluable insights into what it takes to thrive in today's evolving marketing world. If you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And if you're looking for more content like this, check out our roster of podcasts available now on the Advertising Week Podcast Network at www.advertisingweek.com/podcasts. Thanks for listening. On this episode of Agency Alchemy, Pete Coates, Managing Director of Omnicom Media Newcastle, breaks down what it really takes to build a modern agency footprint from the ground up and why regional expansion today isn't about geography, it's about access to talent, to clients, and to new ways of working. Pete shares the strategic advantage behind launching Omnicom Media in Newcastle from scratch rather than through acquisition, and how that decision unlocked a first-mover advantage in an underserved market. More importantly, he outlines how the team is reimagining the agency operating model itself, moving beyond outdated structures towards distributed, frictionless teams that prioritize both client outcomes and employee equity. Pete, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for taking the time to be on today.
No problem. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, most people are familiar with Omnicom Media. You're at Omnicom Media Newcastle. Let's start with that. What was the strategic thinking behind expanding into Newcastle, and how do you evaluate whether a new regional market is truly worth the investment?
So I guess this goes back to probably about 3 years ago. And before I come along as a result of the business choosing to open a new office in my home city of Newcastle. But I think that the original thinking was very much at the time, Omnicom Media were kind of very concentrated from a talent perspective in London, in the UK, with an operation out of Manchester. And looking at sort of our major competitors in the UK, they had a broader footprint and a presence in a larger number of cities in the UK. So I guess that began a kind of period of exploration to look at the potential for kind of broadening out the operations into new cities, bringing with it new talent pool opportunities and new opportunities to connect with new business clients. So I guess that was the original genesis of the idea, and we got started in earnest at the beginning of 2024, which is when I came on board, and was literally one of the first two people that existed on day one. I guess the alternative solution some businesses may look to is acquisition, going and buying an existing business in a location somewhere else, which kind of gives you a kind of an infrastructure on day one. However, we chose to go about it a little differently by starting up something entirely from scratch.
And why Newcastle?
I guess when it comes to picking a location, it comes down to a variety of different factors. I mean, in terms of the kind of the bigger network agencies, Newcastle is not one that has got much of a presence from the other network agencies within the city. So I guess we felt that gave us the opportunity to kind of take first mover advantage, really, and sort of be able to kind of explore the opportunities for growth around there. I mean, in the UK, obviously London is very much the center of our industry, which it is for most industries. It's kind of a global megacity, one of the most economically influential cities in the world, and always likely will be. However, there are other sort of big cities around the UK that have got a fairly strong presence within kind of our industry, with the likes of kind of Manchester and Leeds in particular, that kind of already had quite an established base there. I guess the view we had of Newcastle was, we get the opportunity to build something for us in the structure, in the way that we want to build it. And it gives us some fairly unique opportunities to explore from a new business and a talent perspective.
Well, speaking of talent, what makes Newcastle a compelling talent market right now? And
I think further to that, how are you building a pipeline that goes beyond hiring into long-term development?
So I think what's great about Newcastle is, and I suppose what's great about everywhere, the starting point for me is that talent anywhere in the country has got the same potential, right? I think that's been a big sort of part of our philosophy in terms of what we've built. I guess the differences between sort of different people in different parts of the country is more kind of what opportunities they've had available to them within their kind of local economies in order to sort of develop skills and knowledge and experience within the kind of the employment opportunities that exist within that area. Now, compared to some of the other cities in the UK, Newcastle's sort of agency sector is very much independent led. And we're obviously a kind of a network agency, and those two environments are obviously very adjacent to each other, but the experience within them is quite different. So I think what's been quite exciting in terms of the talent that we've met to date is that they sort of come from sort of a different frame of reference, which is brilliant because it brings with it this sort of different strengths and sort of new thinking that can kind of come into our industry. But I think, again, what Newcastle has offered for us is a real opportunity to bring new talent into our business and new talent into the industry as a whole. So 20% of the hiring that we've done today has been entry level hiring, bringing people in, taking their first steps on their career ladder. And Newcastle's a great university city. There's two fantastic universities in the city that we've built some really strong partnerships with to start connecting with the talent who are graduating within the city and wanting to stay there in order to work. But we're also broadening that out and sort of forming partnerships with colleges and schools to try and kind of inspire more people to consider a career within the advertising industry in the future.
Amazing. Traditional multi-office agency models feel somewhat outdated at times, especially in today's distributed, sort of always-on environment. What would you say needs to change, and how is Omnicom Media Newcastle rethinking that operating model?
So I think I take a lot of my personal inspiration in terms of what I do actually from kind of the times that I've spent working with colleagues in the States. So I remember my first ever kind of global pitch that I was involved with. It involved flying out to sort of New York to work with colleagues from around the world. And kind of what jumped out to me very much on day one, we'd flown over and we were sat in a meeting room in a big office building in Manhattan. And at the beginning of the day, there were three or four people there who worked in the New York office, and then half an hour later, somebody arrived having flown in from Boston. About an hour later, somebody sort of had flown in from Dallas and joined the team. And kind of what I observed in terms of the dynamic around me was a group of people who looked like they worked seamlessly and frictionlessly together. Um, every day of the week. That felt to me kind of quite different to my own experience of kind of how the interactivity had kind of worked between sort of different geolocations in the UK, both within the agency sector, but I think more broadly within sort of business in general. So I think our jumping off point was very much about how do we build a model that creates real value for our clients and works in an incredibly frictionless way. So um, on day one, when we started designing this thing, I think we started to map out what models can we see that other agency groups have employed in the past, and sort of we're able to categorize them into sort of three core categories that we labeled the silo model, the service center model, and the shop front model. So the silo model is kind of what a lot of people working in agency land had been used to kind of going back 10, 15 years ago, which was a local regional location would be a unique P&L in its own right. It would live or die by its own new business and organic growth performance, and it would employ the people that it needed in order to be able to service the business that it won. Um, Now, in today's world, that is really challenging because an agency needs to be able to provide such a broad sort of spectrum of capabilities to clients in order to be able to add the value that they want, and it has to be able to operate at the speed where it can develop new and evolving capabilities all of the time, which makes it challenging, certainly, to start something up from scratch and be able to sort of forward invest in all of the skills and experience and capability that you need from day one in order to be able to deliver that. The shop front model is more a case of where you might open an office in a location and put the sort of the agency badge above the door, but ultimately employ a fairly small team of people whose role it is to kind of funnel work from local clients back to the main office, perhaps in London, in order for that work to happen. And I guess that's a fairly strong distributed model, but it can kind of cause some flexibility issues in terms of, being able to respond to kind of evolving client needs. And then the service center model, I guess people would recognize, is sort of saying, right, well, we need scaled capability in this particular channel. So we're going to hire a large body of staff in a location somewhere else in the country or somewhere else in the world, and we're going to teach them how to do a particular thing, and we're going to utilize them in that way moving forward. But my experience of observing that can sometimes create a bit of a people and talent challenge, creates a bit of a two-tier culture that exists within the organization. So I guess our jumping off point was very much about trying to build a model that could add value for our clients, that we could build operationally in a way that ensures workflows operate seamlessly and without friction, but also something that ensures equity of experience for our staff. So our staff, regardless of where we place them, feel like they're an integral part of the solution that we're delivering for our clients and an integral part of growing our business. So that's what it ultimately boils down to. We built a model built on the principles of distributed teams and kind of designed the solutions that we needed to for the individual clients and capabilities that we were building teams for. And so far, that's proven to be really successful.
There's a lot of talk about going local. There's not always a clear playbook, I think, for obvious reasons. What does it actually take to understand and then activate against regional nuance in a way that drives impact for clients?
My view on that would be that ultimately clients will make decisions that work for clients, right? Their responsibility is to the value that exists within the brands and the businesses that they work for, and that will always be their deciding factor in terms of what they what they want to be able to pursue in terms of an agency relationship. As a result of that, I've always very much seen what we're building in Newcastle as kind of a value add rather than a proposition in and of itself. It wouldn't be right of me to expect any client to work with us simply by virtue of where we exist in the country. They want access to best in class capability. They want access to best in class thinking, and we at Omnicom Media can provide that. And if we can build an operating model for a client that involves utilizing talent in Newcastle because perhaps we're geographically closer to them, or perhaps we have a greater understanding of core segments of their audience, then that's what we'll do. But I would never expect anybody to work with us simply by virtue of the fact that we happen to be down the road.
And then again, from the client perspective, what are the challenges you might be seeing in regional markets, especially around distributed workforces and local insight?
Well, I think I don't suppose I see a lot in terms of challenge majorly. I think the kind of the challenges that we face are very much about designing team structures and kind of operational models that kind of enable us to kind of work in a fairly interoperable way with our colleagues and our clients in the way that we work. I think when we designed our business model and how we were going to operate out of our office in Newcastle, we very much thought along kind of four key areas of thinking, four dimensions that we needed to be able to design our ways of working in. The first of which was talent. How do we make sure that the shape of the talent that we are bringing into the business is going to adapt to a different way of working with the kind of the tools, the technology, and the clients that we operate with, and make sure that we put in place the right kind of onboarding solutions for our talent and access to training, development, and kind of working with colleagues in order to be able to kind of adapt and get on board with the way that we work. That second dimension was clients. What clients exist within this new area that we are operating with, and how can we sort of leverage the relationships that we can create with those in order to be able to bring the best of what Omnicom Media can do and sort of enable us to utilize our office in Newcastle as a front door to the breadth of capability that Omnicom Media can provide. The third, and often underestimated, but something that's been hugely valuable for us is kind of the partnerships. As a media agency, we thrive on the partnerships that we have with media owners and technology partners. How can we make sure that we can access those relationships in a way that's equitable with the way our colleagues do in other cities around the UK? And I think I'd call out in particular kind of how strong the kind of the partnering function within most of those media owners is outside of London in the UK. Those guys do a really great job of kind of getting out on the road and visiting everywhere from sort of Newcastle to Birmingham to Leeds to Glasgow to Edinburgh, Sheffield, Liverpool, etc., to be able to drive those partnerships. And it's been critical for us to work out how to work with those guys. And then finally making sure that we make small adjustments within kind of the way that we operate as an organization in order to be able to make it a success. I think starting something up from scratch within an already successful legacy organization involves recognizing that what you're building is something in the image of that organization. We're not here to change the kind of the way that that Omnicom Media operates. We're here to understand how we can create a version of that plugs into the wider organization and the clients that they already have, that enables us to draw all of the benefits that come from kind of that organizational structure. So a lot of what we've done internally is kind of more about kind of making small adjustments to things like how we structure meetings or how we interact and discuss and sort of collaborate on work with our colleagues, rather than anything particularly transformational. So having had the opportunity to kind of work through all of those different levels, we found a really strong way of working that works very well for us and for our clients.
Speaking of organizational structure, what does that look like now, and what does the footprint look like down the road?
In the UK, we currently have 4 offices. We have our office in London, our office in Manchester, we have an office in Leeds, and we have an office in Newcastle. And ultimately, the same rules apply to all of us in terms of trying to design solutions for clients. We'll ultimately design the solutions that the client needs us to, whether that's in terms of geographic location or whether that's in terms of capability. And we exist in an ever evolving world. We are constantly reviewing the operational structure of our organization and our business, and looking at the opportunities and challenges that face us, both kind of in terms of market dynamics, in terms of sort of capability and skills that we need to be developing. But having that multi-location footprint just adds an extra string to our bow in terms of how we can design solutions to that. It gives us access to kind of a broader talent footprint in multiple different locations around the country that we're able to connect with new ways of working. But it also gives us kind of great proximity to kind of client HQs, and ultimately more and more clients are operating in an ever increasingly distributed way. So it also enables us to think cleverly about how we can structure teams around clients. So if clients have 2 or 3 locations within the UK where they have different centers of excellence within their own organization, then it gives us the opportunity to kind of mirror that structure and pair the talent on the client side with the talent on our side in order to work more seamlessly together.
Earlier you mentioned bringing the best of Omnicom Media to clients. How do you balance global scale and capability then with the need for local relevance and, I think, further to that, agility?
So I think the model kind of has agility baked into it by default. Ultimately, if we are able to engage with the client at a local level who would like to work with us in order to support what they're doing from a kind of marketing and communications perspective, it gives them instant access to any capability that exists anywhere within our organization, whether that's within the UK or anywhere else in the world. If a UK-based client wants to tap into export markets in order to be able to grow their business, then we're able to instantly build solutions and models where we can tap them into people with local market expertise in any market that they need us to. So the way that we've built our operating model as a business just enables us to be able to bring in the expertise that the client wants us to at any particular time. So we found that particularly useful when engaging at a local level with existing clients or with prospective clients, we're able to offer them the breadth of everything that Omnicom Media is able to offer them, while partnering them up with a core team at a local level who are there to be their kind of their front door to our entire agency proposition.
Excellent. Well, Pete, this has been fantastic. If one wanted to find out more about Omnicom Media, Newcastle, and yourself, where should they go?
Just look me up on LinkedIn. You'll find me if you search for Pete Coates in Newcastle. You'll find me very quickly.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for taking part.
No problem. Thank you for having me.